Welcome to this week's edition of Black Authors Matter TV, where we interview the latest movers and shakers in the African American literary community. You'll meet some old friends, discover new ones, and stay abreast of the latest book developments around the country and even the world. So sit back and relax for the next 2 hours with Black Authors Matter TV co-hosts Gwen Richardson and Dr. Rhonda Lawson.
Happy New Year and welcome to the first episode of Black Authors Matter TV for 2024. I'm Gwen Richardson, your host for tonight.
And I'm Dr. Rhonda Lawson. Good evening, everyone.
And if you all notice, Dr. Rhonda has a new background, and that's because she moved into a new house. So congratulations on moving into your new house.
Thank you.
And we have another amazing show. We have a couple of announcements, and then we're going to be showing you a short video about Rhonda's upcoming Black History Month event. So one thing I want to say is that the photos from this year's festival and videos, they've all been uploaded and posted now. So there are hundreds of them. So if you get a chance, go to our Facebook or Instagram pages and look at the photos. We have some amazing footage from the festival. The registration for this year's festival is open. The festival is October 17th through
Black
the 19th.
Authors Matter TV co-host.
And Rhonda had something going on, I think.
Yeah, I'm good
now. Okay. The registration is open for this year. People started signing up immediately. I mean, as soon as I announced it was going to be opening, registration started coming in. So I'm expecting, at this rate, but this is the earliest and the fastest we've had like multiple signups, like right of the gate. So I'm thinking we're going to sell out earlier this year than we normally do. So if you want to participate, get your $50 deposit in. That's all you have to pay to secure your table, and you have months to pay the rest. And finally, the Black Authors Matter Children's Book Awards process. That's an award that we give out every year for children's authors. And that process is open. So go to blackauthors.matterbookawards.com if you want to submit your book and to see the guidelines. That process continues through months, and it doesn't close to June. So you have plenty of time. So anyway, we're going to now show the video about Rhonda's upcoming event, which is called, Rhonda, say what it's called. I don't want to get it wrong. I don't want to get the name wrong.
It's the Black History Month Literary Weekend. It's the 8th annual Black History Month Literary Weekend.
Okay. All right. Here we go on the video, with the video. So that's Rhonda's book event that she's the brainchild behind it, and she's been doing it. This is her 8th year. So make plans to attend if you're in the DMV area, or even if you're not, make plans to fly in or drive in and attend. So we're
Yes.
going to get started. We are giving away one book tonight, and we'll do that after this first interview since we're a little late getting started with that. And so our first guest is Ashley Knight, and she's the owner of Words Unite Bookstore in Killeen, Texas, which is near a military installation, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, Fort Hood, Texas.
Fort Hood, Texas, that's what is near. And so Ashley is going to tell us about her venture, her bookstore. And I believe, I'm trying to recall, because we had a conversation about you being on the show, Ashley, several months ago. And you have a mobile, did you have a mobile bookstore? Is that what it is? I think you have something
Hey,
unique.
lady.
Hi, how are you? Do you have a mobile bookstore?
Yes, ma'am. So I have a mobile bookstore, a vending machine in stores on military bases.
That is
Okay.
awesome. I wish you were there when I was stationed at Fort Hood.
Right. And it ain't Fort Hood no more. It's Fort Cavazos now.
Oh, that's right. They've been changing all of the names of um racist people, of people who were a
In
part
the
of
Confederacy or
Confederacy, right?
Right.
And they've been
Right.
changing the names to other names. Fort Cavazos is a good name.
Yes. Yeah.
so who is that named after? Do you know?
It's a Hispanic command sergeant major. So they
Okay.
made it a Latino command sergeant major reference for Fort Hood now. It's Fort Cavazos.
Okay. Now, tell us about Words Unite Bookstore and your mobile and your vending machines. That's an amazing combination. Tell us about that and how you got going with it.
Awesome. So again, hi everyone. I'm Ashley Knight, aka Ashley Free Miss Positivity. And as Miss Positivity, I know everyone understands that, everybody has a story, but because there was different challenges that I faced, I needed a positive light to like kind of reach towards. And so I started writing. And so I'm an author as well. This is an author-owned, veteran-owned, Black-owned, woman-owned bookstore. And
Yes.
and with me being an author, I realized what issues authors had as far as selling books, marketing books, distributing. And so I've been asking all around in different mainstream distributors, like get our self-published books on, the front street of most bookstores as well as distributed in bulk. And I kept getting the answer no. So I created Word Unite Bookstore as a traveling bookstore to pop up and sell more books directly. And so we sell books directly. That's the concept, to showcase independent authors. We are the profit solution for independent authors. So I give authors 80% of their sales back and I take 20%. That's the best deal you're gonna get anywhere as an author. And I love it because I'm an author as well. And so I showcase local authors only. I do not publicize mainstream books. I only showcase independent authors. And so with that, I've been in business for 4 years. And so that's how I got 2 stores at Fort Cavazos now, one at the hospital, one at the PX, and then I have traveled statewide to over 41 military installations showcasing at different military exchanges, as well as I just launched the first book vending machine here at Fort Cavazos, and it's at the PX as well. And so we're going to continue that.
I love the idea of a book vending machine. And this is the first I've actually heard of a book vending machine. I've seen, of course, the snacks. I've seen the hair vending machines now. I've seen makeup vending machines, and I've even
Right.
seen electronics vending machines. You see them in the airports a lot,
Airport.
where if you need the earbuds before you get on the plane. But I think a book vending machine is an amazing concept. Where do you put your machines?
So I am currently working to put my book vending machines at every military exchange. So just like I said, I travel state to state. So everywhere that I go, I can drop a book vending machine at a military exchange, AFES location or PX location, which is their main mall. So I have a contract with them. I can just drop a vending machine. I can go and leave it there and then just worry about restocking. And then I got called by the American Booksellers Association last month. I am one of two bookstores that has a book vending machine. The other bookstores in California, they actually have their book vending machine in their store. And then I have mine popping up at military installations.
Yeah, I heard about the other one in California. I think it's Sister Sci-Fi. They
Sister, yep,
focus on science fiction.
that's it.
I had worked to get them on the show. Haven't gotten them on yet, but that was the first one I heard about. But you're the first one that we've heard about that's been on the show. So that allows people to know about it. How many how many titles do you typically have in your vending machine?
So right now, my current vending machine, I got a grant. So thank you to Texas Veterans Entrepreneur Center. I got a $5,000 grant, and it can only host 108 books. And so that's many titles, and I can only do hardcover books. It's been tearing up the paperback books. So it's, trial and error. You got to learn about the liabilities and, the advances of creating new things. And so we're working out the kinks of having a vending machine that actually spits it out like pizza or something like that. That's my goal. So I am right now currently doing fundraisers to raise money for the vending machines that spit it out like pizza. There's some in airports already. That those vending machines kind of give it a better distribution portion. And so those vending machines cost $8,000. The one I got, I refurbished and made it, and I got it for $5,000 with the grant. And so that's the goal. This is my first one, like I said, but I can do 108 books in there. With the current one I have, there's ones that you can put like 300 books in there if we do it that way.
So you said that you said only local authors, no mainstream authors. But do you mean only authors in Texas, or do you mean indie authors and they can be anywhere in the United States?
Yes, indie authors anywhere in the United States. I have authors as far as Canada who are it's a consignment opportunity. So I call them showcase authors. So showcase authors pay a membership. They put their books into the store, and then I take them everywhere that I go. But yes, indie authors, anywhere across the internationally.
That's wonderful.
Now, someone said that there were no bookstores when she was at Fort Hood. That's Tony Benita. And she also said, check with King's Naval Base in Kingsland, Georgia. Are you familiar with that one?
I have not been to any naval bases, and I actually have been trying to get point of contacts for naval bases. So listen, if you have some information, please let me know. But I have done Air Force, Army, and Marines. I have not been able to tap into any of the Navy exchanges yet. I've been really hitting up Hawaii. I served there for 4 years, and I'm trying to do the NEX there, which is a naval um, location. So if I can get into it, then yes, I will try.
Well, I do want to say, Tony, I got to give credit where it's due. There did used to be a Black bookstore in the Fort Cavazos area. Back then,
Yes.
It was called
Babatunde.
Yep, Babatunde. And I got to give him his props.
Yeah, he is my mentor. So yes, girl, give him his props. He had 2 bookstores. He had the longest Black-owned bookstore under one roof.
Yes.
Where you spend your money is where you give your power. And
Yep.
he is my mentor. I just literally talked to him this morning and showed him my 2024 setup. He's helped me from building the bookstore to where I am now. So yes, he is truly an inspiration.
Well, he may not remember me, but just tell him I said hi and give him a hug. I used to be in his store all the time when I was stationed in Killeen.
I thought I remembered
I'm gonna
one, but
screenshot you.
okay. But I remember Babatunde. What was the name of the store?
Under one roof.
Okay. I think I talked to him because when we had our brick and mortar, the Black bookstores used to talk, to each other and share. Sometimes we would exchange products or titles, or we would work together on things. So I got to know several of them when I had the brick and mortar. Of course, I didn't get out of the book business, but having a brick and mortar is different from what I do now, because I used to have a bookstore for 10 years. So it was a labor of love, and we transitioned into more on the marketing side. So
Right.
yeah, I enjoyed it when we did it. It was what do I want to say? It
An
was
experience.
a very interesting and challenging experience. And it
It
was
was
a
a
lot of
love.
peaks and valleys. There were a lot of periods where there'd be like a boomlet of something, and then the boomlet would kind of die down. Then there'd be another boomlet. So I'm not sure what the boomlet is now, but
So we've had at least three other black owned slash bookstores in Central Texas. I'm the last one standing. But honestly, in the community, our black owned bookstores or bookstores in general in Central Texas, that's Killeen, Belton, not Belton. We have one in Belton, Killeen, Coppers Cove,
Okay.
Nolan, like all of the surrounding areas. Harker Heights is where I had my store before. So I've had a store in the community, but because it's not been profitable for us to stay open, a lot of us have had to close. Now, like I said, I specialize on military installation
mhm.
because that's where for me direct sales is better. I get the traffic automatically. The soldiers are there. I'm a previous soldier. I'm a veteran, so it's easy. But I wanted to have a community based one. We've had beautiful bookstores in the community, but the support is just not there, and it's really sad because I hear it all the time. You know, we need a bookstore in the community. We need a bookstore in the community, but realistically, you got to support the bookstores in the community, and so that's why I stay on post because it's a better profitable position for the bookstore to stay alive, but we definitely do need one in the community. And so I'm looking forward to the opportunity, but as a business owner, it's not profitable for me to stay outside.
Yeah, it's people don't understand a lot of times that if you don't make a profit, you can't survive. And you
Right,
don't make money unless you sell a book. Having books
right.
on the shelves is not profit, it's inventory, it's cost of goods sold. And if nothing moves, it's just money on the shelf. So, but I like the idea of you found a niche, you're on the military bases where you have a prime market, you understand the market since you're a veteran, and then you have your mobile aspect of it, which that keeps your overhead low because for us, the rent kept going up.
Hmm.
Now we had the space, the rent, when we first got in the space, I think it was rent free for 6 months, and then every year it went up, and then it was just too much. Then we tried to get less square feet in the same strip center, and we did that for 3 or 4 years, but then we decided to just transition. We did more in the marketing side, and we started off totally online. So that was where we got our start. It was totally online, and then we went brick and mortar, and then now we're offline, and we're not in the retail space for books other than uh, books that I publish. So my own books, that's the only books we sell actually direct to customers. And for
Okay.
everybody else, we just send them to the Amazon or their websites or
Right.
somewhere else because and that's just where we are. But I'm glad to see that people are still out here doing things, and I'm glad that you told people that the stores need support. And what support means is spending money. Or referring customers that spend money, but money has to be spent.
Correct.
Otherwise, they can't make a living. And if they can't make a living, they can't keep it open.
Exactly. Exactly.
So now you said you're an author as well. So are you still writing?
I am, girl. Listen, I met, first of all, I'm an author. My grandma's an author. My kids are authors. So this is a family affair. So my grandma wrote the first book in 1987 called Don't
Right.
Give Up. So it was a children's book. So we knew what publishing a book looked like. We kind of got introduced to the authorship journey when my grandma became an author. But then, like, I went through the military. I graduated high school, went through the military, didn't even think of that until I met this 10-year-old girl named Jada Holly. Her pen name is J Simone. She has three books in my store right now. She is now has a bachelor's degree in college, and she's one of my employees. But she inspired me. I was 29 years old, and she had 3 books, best-selling author, and I'm like, yo, you 29, you ain't got a book written yet. And so meeting her kind of like was like, you already know what authorship looks like. Grandma showed you. This 10-year-old has published 3 books. It's time for you to publish. And ever since then, I've been publishing out the wazoo. I have 9 books. I started my journey in an anthology. So I wrote with other authors just 1 chapter. That's the best way to get your feet wet if you're an author or looking to be an author. Look for book projects that you can just write 1 chapter that'll kind of get you the gist of publishing. And then after that, I've been writing solo projects as well as helping others publish books, because you have no idea how many times I've heard people say, well, I paid this publisher and they have no book to show for it. And it's really, really sad because they pay a lot of money. And so
Absolutely.
I have a team of publishers as well as myself, who give them real published product as well as a place to sell their books once they publish their book.
Okay. All
So
right.
how can a person get involved with you? I mean, because we have a lot of authors who watch the show and they may be thinking, I want to be a part of this movement.
Yes, awesome. So you just go to www.wordunitebookstore.com. That's the website. We are also revamping the website. Like I said, I've been in business for 4 years. This is year 5. So we want to uplift or get a facelift of our website. So that's transitioning, but the website that we have now still works. So www.wordunitebookstore.com. You say become an author, or get for more information, you can contact me, or you can contact me at info@wordunitebookstore.com. You will get me directly. I'm the owner. And I have an amazing staff with 2 stores open. So if you want to come in person, you can come meet any of us there. But anywhere in Killeen, you can come contact me or do www.wordunitebookstore.com. You can contact me through there.
Okay, well, I did put the website in the chat. So everybody support this movement. Get your books in this bookstore. And then just so they know that you are not a nonprofit organization.
I am not.
There is a cost. I mean, it's
Yes.
a great cost, and you're not going to get a better deal than this. But there is a cost to get your book involved in Words Unite Bookstore. Am I right?
You are correct. So like I said before, I give y'all 80% when I sell your books every month. So I sell your book, I tell you how many books you sold, I give you 80% the following month. It's a consignment opportunity, and I only take 20%. And per year, it only costs you $100, people. $100 per author. You know why? Because I have 9 books. I know how much books cost. So with that, I will carry as many titles as you have. And I have authors who have over 30 books that they've published. So you can give me as many titles as you want, but it's $100 per author. And I just make you an account, you become a member. I also make you sign all of the books. So you got to remember that this is a special place where they get to meet real live published authors. So we sign all of our books, so they get signed copies and they get local authors' books, like self-published authors, indie authors' books. So this is a place you want to be as an additional platform, because you definitely should be selling your own books directly, daily, some kind of way. You should be having a constant selling op tempo for your career as an author. But I'm an additional platform, and I'm telling you, for most of our people, it's a profit solution, because I changed the game with selling books for some of these authors.
Do you have
Okay.
particular genres that you focus on?
So my bookstore in general focuses on being a positive life influencing environment. So I don't promote hate. I do not promote crime. I read every book that I receive, and I talk to all the authors that I do receive their books. So it's not a genre specific. I would like to cover all genres, but I will not carry a book unless an author created it. It has to be an indie author. So people always ask me, do you have this title, fantasy, whatever? I will carry a fantasy book, but I got to meet the author who created it, and I have them be a consigned author in the store. So I only carry books for authors who join as a member. I don't just go buy books and let you get a title that you specifically like. So I will carry every genre as long as it's positive life influencing.
Okay, and how many authors do you have under your umbrella at this time?
Yes, that's what I love. This year was the first year I got to celebrate Word Unite Bookstore because, like you said before, there are hills and valleys of this business, and this year we got the recap on 4 years. I started with 15 authors. One, just two. Me. I had a business owner. I had a fellow business owner with me, so the founding members were two authors, but now it's just me as a sole member. So we both started with just our books. Then we got 15 authors to just start Word Unite Bookstore. We started with just a solid 15. Now we got 93 authors on my books. I literally just finished my books for the year this week, and I have 93 authors that have published books that I sell their books in the store. That's thousands of books in the store.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Congratulations.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Well, I thank you for coming on and sharing your concept and innovation. I love to see innovation in the lit space because we have to innovate or die. That's what we have to continue to do.
Yeah.
And so, Ashley, you are on it. And congratulations on being a mover and a shaker and an innovator. So, thank you for being a guest on the show. Rhonda says she put your website on wordsunitebookstore.com. So people who are interested in getting their work in your bookstore or potentially the vending machine, they could contact you.
Yes, awesome. Thank you so much for having me. You have a great night,
Thank
guys.
you for being here. It's wonderful to meet you. Let's stay in touch.
Will do. Later.
Okay, good night. All right, our next guest will be coming up in one moment, but I did want to let you all know the book that we're giving away this week. We gave one away before, and we had Eric LaSalle, actor and author Eric LaSalle, on the show. And Laws of Depravity is the first book in the series that he has. And we're going to be giving this away. I'm not going to announce the trivia question until after the end of this next interview. But we're going to be giving away all three books in the series over the next 3 weeks. So this is book one, Laws of Depravity. And so we'll announce the trivia question at the end of this interview. So our next guest is Kevin Hazzard. And Kevin is an author. He's a journalist. He also is a former paramedic. Kevin is not an African-American, but the book that he wrote is called American Sirens, and it's about the first Black paramedics in the United States in Pittsburgh. And they were also, they were the first ones in Pittsburgh, but also the first ones in the United States. They kind of created the whole paramedic industry, or I guess that's what you would call it. But he wrote a book about it. And so we wanted to have him on to talk about his book and what motivated him to write the book and the research that he did. So, Kevin, welcome to Black Authors Matter TV.
Thanks for having me on.
And you're a journalist as well as a former paramedic. So, did the journalism come first or the medicine?
The journalism came first for me, and then 9/11 happened, and I was kind of young working at a newspaper, and I was like, all right, I think I should be doing more than I am. And I wasn't sure what that would look like. And then one night I got called out to cover a tunnel collapse, and it was a really horrific event. And I looked at the people who showed up to help, and I thought, all right, that's something I can do. And it just became my life for a decade.
Wow. So that one moment just kind of changed the way you viewed things, or was it that you saw just everybody coming together? What was it about it? Just because everybody helped?
Yeah, so it was this Northwest Atlanta. They were doing this massive wastewater treatment project, and they had this enormous hole, hundreds of yards wide, hundreds of yards deep. There were a group of men down on the scaffolding, and it just gave way underneath them, and they disappeared into the earth. And so we got there. I was a newspaper journalist. I got there shortly before the family did. And so we were standing there covering what had happened and trying to figure out what was going to happen next. And, very quickly, what we all realized was a body recovery became very personal, because there were a dozen women who were waiting to see if their husbands were going to come out. And so, what do you say to somebody in a moment like that? How do you interact with someone and, who's trying to wrap their head around this sort of unfolding tragedy, which while you assume also holding on to a sort of a glimmer of hope. And while that was happening, the city's high-angle technical rescue team came, and they were the ones who lowered themselves down to pull these bodies out. And, the sort of 23-year-old in me responded to the way these guys carried themselves, a certain confidence, but the human in me responded to the way that they dealt with the families. They were, nobody else wanted to say anything, but of course these guys were on the other side of that bridge. They were sort of in it together, and they were able to communicate with these people. And that was something that just clicked with me, this idea of these two people being able to make this connection across a tremendous divide in the midst of a horrible tragedy. And I thought it just felt like a worthwhile thing as soon as I saw it, and seemed kind of what I've been searching for.
Wow. So, first of all, that's a beautiful story and it's very inspirational. But I guess now I wonder, what made you decide that you wanted to write about the history of EMTs, and then even further, what made you look into Black EMTs?
I wrote, after having worked for 10 years on an ambulance, I wrote a memoir about sort of the crazy, funny, scary, wild life that is, a career on an ambulance. And after it came out, somebody who read it sent me this email and said, "Hey, have you ever heard of Freedom House?" And I had not. And so I started looking into it. And two things struck me. First was working on an ambulance was this, it was this really formative decade of my life. It's something I take very personally. I have a strong connection to the medical community, the emergency community, first responder community from that time. And so when I saw that there was this incredible origin story to EMS that had never been told, that I had never been told, that nobody I knew had been told, I don't know, it frustrated me, because I thought, here's this incredibly worthwhile career that these people do. And the way it all began, the people who started it have been lost to history. And I thought, I was already a writer. I'd already been a journalist, and it just felt like the perfect story for me to get into. And then, of course, the more I began to dig into it, the more I realized that at every turn, each person that I came across was more fascinating than the last. And the story just kept ratcheting itself up, and the tension and the stakes kept getting higher. And suddenly you realize that it's an incredible story. And then when I started reaching out to people, wasn't sure what kind of reaction I was going to get. These were men in their 70s, who they had been waiting decades, since before I was born, for someone to tell their story. So I didn't know how frustrated they were going to be. I didn't know how open they would be. People have a tendency to promise a lot when you have a very exciting story. And I figured that these guys were probably snake bit. And what I found was this incredibly gracious group of people who were humble, but also incredibly proud. And all they wanted was an opportunity for the world to know what they'd done. Early on in my research, I spoke with a widow, and she said, my husband died without my children knowing what he did. And I just want someone to tell the story. And you can't have a conversation like that and walk away. That you have no choice but to kind of dig in as a, just as a human. You just think, my God, like, this is a story that deserves to be told.
Right. So the title of your book is American Sirens, but the subhead, and I had that right here. Oh, here it is. The incredible story of the Black men who became America's first paramedics. So people don't, it's sort of a niche within a niche within a niche. People don't really think that, they hear more about doctors, they're in hospitals, or even nurses. And we have some more information about nurses historically. That have served in the wars, World War II, World War I, but we hadn't really heard anything about this whole topic of paramedics. And it's amazing that you took it upon yourself to bring it to life. Now, how did you, in your research, do you have a copy of your book so you can show the cover to people?
I do.
I'm upset with you that you had to look for it though.
Okay, yeah, American Salaries. So who's the person on the cover?
A
Who's the-
gentleman by the name of Walt Brown, who was sort of, you know, if Peter Safar was the intellectual fountainhead from which the idea sprang, Walt Brown was he was the personality and he was the guy who represented the people who were doing the work. Walt was, you know, this huge personality that everybody kind of fell in line with. We all know that kind of person who just sort of, you know, is a natural leader, and he was that kind of guy, but he also, you know, was able to, you know, touch very personally people of all different ages. You know, some of these guys were incredibly young. Some of these guys were, you know, in their 60s. And, you know, he was able to sort of coalesce this group into this incredibly effective force. And, you know, unfortunately, he died before I got onto the story, but everybody I talked to, you know, the one thing you would hear over and over again is it's a shame he didn't talk to Walt. It's a shame he didn't talk to Walt. Because he was, you know, he was really the heart behind the operation. So he was the one who wound up in the cover.
I think that's great that all these people held him up to such high regard, and then you put him on the cover. I'm sure that meant a lot to the people you talked with.
I hope so. I mean, that was certainly the intention.
So how did they get started being paramedics when they didn't exist before? How did?
And that's what's part of what's so incredible about this story. So there are two things that happen at once. One is that in 1965, a small, sort of forgotten little organization within the U.S. government puts up this pamphlet that's since been known as the white paper that said that paramedics were, or the word paramedic didn't exist, but we'll just use it. Yeah, paramedics were too few to be there when you needed them and too unskilled to be of much use when they did get there. And it was such a huge problem that in 1965 alone, more Americans were killed in highway traffic accidents than had died in the entire Korean War. And at the same time, you're more likely to survive a gunshot wound in Vietnam than you are in the US. And the reason for both of those things is that there's no pre-hospital care. So nobody knows what to do about that. So that's kind of where we are in 1965, is that if you have a medical emergency, the people who show up at your door in all likelihood are going to be two undertakers and a hearse, because it's the only business capable of carrying a body. So if you have an emergency, imagine you are hoping not to die and you look out your window and this hearse screeches up with flower petals trailing from the last funeral. I mean, it feels like the worst way to begin this like life-saving moment, but that was the reality. And so there's a doctor, Peter Safar. He was this Austrian-born anesthesiologist who had invented just a decade before CPR. Prior to that, the method that we had was this really archaic mechanical method of trying to manipulate the body. And Safar undertook a series of studies to prove that exhaled oxygen could keep people alive. So he introduces mouth to mouth and he pairs that with chest compressions. He releases the results of his study, and sort of instantly, you know, the world has CPR, and he travels all over the place to teach it. So then from there, he invents the modern ICU. He invents critical care. He's a pioneer in the world of anesthesiology, which was just beginning. So this is the sort of person he is. He's living in Pittsburgh in the early 1960s, and he had a daughter who was a severe asthmatic who died one evening while he and his wife were out of town. She went into a bad asthma attack. Help was called, and in the time that she was picked up by the first responders until the time she got to the hospital, she was not breathing, and so was brain dead. So even though when they got to the hospital, Safar himself took over her care, got a heart rate back on her, got her breathing again, but was unable to save her because she was brain dead. So he now has this very personal reason to want to fix this problem that the nation faces in 1965. And so he develops what we would today recognize as a paramedic training program. It's as rigorous as anything people take today. He modeled it after medical school. So he understood that if you wanted to create a new profession, you needed to create a new professional. So he designed a program that laymen could walk into, people with zero medical experience or training whatsoever. They could take this course and come out on the other side of it and be ready. So it was going to be a very intense 9-month course. in which they would learn heart attacks and strokes and how to stop bleeding, overdoses, deliver babies, respiratory emergencies, seizures, give narcotics, all this stuff. And then when they were done, they would go through the OR, the ER, ICU, OB, all these things to sort of see and put their hands on all this knowledge and then go out in the street and do it. So he has this wonderful idea, but can you imagine somebody saying to you, hey, put your life on hold for this incredibly intense 9-month course that you might fail out of, in which, by the way, when it's over with, you might not have a job because this thing technically doesn't exist. Like you aren't going to get people to walk away from their job to do that. So you've got to, who are you going to find? So he can't find anybody. So you have on one side of Pittsburgh, Peter Sapper, who has this great idea, but no people to carry it out. And on the other side of Pittsburgh, you have a man by the name of James McCoy, who was a civil rights activist who'd grown frustrated with what he considered to be a slow-moving older generation of civil rights activists. And he struck out on his own, created this organization called Freedom House. And the idea for Freedom House was to generate job opportunities and like job training programs for people who were living in the Hill District, which was a predominantly Black neighborhood in Pittsburgh. And he just couldn't find anything that he was looking for. He didn't want to train gardeners and housekeepers. He wanted a sort of career that was going to bring people to another level of society. And, not terribly surprisingly, he was having a very difficult time finding that sort of a job training program for, Black people living in the Hill, which at that time, like a lot of America, once thriving neighborhood had been sucker punched by urban renewal. And so huge swaths of neighborhood were torn down. A civic center was put in, a highway was put in. And so, job opportunities go away, hope goes away, crime goes up, poverty goes up. So by the mid 1960s, the Hill was in a very bad spot. And he was trying to find a way to, to help people in his community. So he has a group of people who can't find a great job. And then over here, you've got Peter Sapper, who's got this great job, but he can't find people. And through this sort of wonderful bit of kismet, they meet. And, Sapper pitches McCoy on the idea of that he's going to, create this quantum leap in medicine and have this whole new branch of emergency medicine that it's going to include these paramedics and go through this training program. And he wants McCoy to recruit and staff the program. And McCoy says, fine, I'll happily do that. But everybody who goes through this training program has to be from the Hill. They have to be Black. And Peter Sapper, he was a white guy. He was Austrian. He didn't have any connection to the American Civil Rights Movement, but he had witnessed the Holocaust at a close remove. He was in Vienna when the Nazis came across the border. His mother was part Jewish. His mom lost her job as a doctor. His father lost his job as a doctor. So he had seen, what hate and violence can bring. And so, he very quickly said, yeah, okay, let's do this. And so in that meeting, two ideas are born. One is that the world's first paramedics will be from the city of Pittsburgh, and two, that there'll be 24 Black men from the Hill District.
That is amazing.
That is.
It's
amazing. One thing is amazing that you can recite all of that.
Yeah,
I've been with this since.
I was actually going to say that too, because I'm listening to you and you're telling this story like you were there and
right.
all of these people.
Right.
I've been living this since 2018.
Oh, okay. So now they go through this program, this 9-month program, and then they graduate, and then they 1965 was still, segregation was still the rule of thumb.
Right.
So were they only able to be paramedics in the Black community, or were they allowed to go throughout the city?
So, well, a couple of things. The city approves the funding in 66. They wind their way through this training program in 67. They emerge in the spring of 68. He's the very first guys to do this. And they had thought that it was going to be this sort of quiet time in which they'd be able to sort of creep out and roll this thing out slowly. And they come out of the classroom at like April 3rd, 1968, thinking that, quiet days are ahead. And of course, Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated in Memphis and cities across America. immediately erupt into violence. And so they're conscripted into duty immediately because police and firefighters are unable to make it into the Hill District. And of course, there are, aside from any injuries that have come up from the violence, they're just ordinary people with health emergencies. And so that's when they begin their first running their first calls. The program was initially only supposed to be in the Hill District in a neighborhood called Oakland, which was where the Pittsburgh University Medical Center was, which is where their doctors were located. And their idea from the beginning was, hey, what we'll do is we'll prove ourselves locally. We will treat our own community. And then once we show that this thing is a viable form of medicine, because again, remember, nobody's performing medicine outside the hospital. Nobody other than a doctor. These guys are technically doing things that a nurse is not allowed to do. And nursing, as you said before, is this long and storied profession. Here's this brand new thing that is theoretically deputizing non-medical personnel to do things that only doctors can do. So they needed to prove it could work and that it was safe and that it was effective. And so they start small. But they assumed that, oh, well, once people see this, common sense will rule out and they will just spread this thing out across the city and everybody will be happy. So initially they start out in their community. It is an immediate success. They do a study of critical patients coming into the hospitals. And what they find is that in critical patients where someone's life is on the line, the fire department and the police department do the wrong thing about 80% of the time. Freedom House, with lives on the line, do the right thing 80% of the time. So it's unequivocally a success. And so then, because Safford's famous and because this is this new innovation, other doctors and communities begin coming in to look what's going on. They're borrowing pieces of it, bringing it out. It is starting to trickle around the country. It is slowly percolating and becoming, a more used and accepted form of medicine. And they branch out to downtown. For the first time, you have Freedom House paramedics responding to calls with white patients. Pittsburgh, it's a northern city. I had assumed that, it wouldn't be, that it wasn't Mississippi, I guess. And but it has Pittsburgh has a very interesting history. In the 1950s, the city filled in its public swimming pool as opposed to integrate it. The reason that James McCoy was able to start Freedom House was because he had spent so much time trying to get utilities and breweries and construction sites to hire Black employees. And at that same time, you had the housing covenants were just beginning to be lifted. So for the first time, a Black family could move into any neighborhood that it wanted in any of the Pittsburgh suburbs. And the white residents found this to be so distasteful and odious that if you and I lived next to each other and I didn't like you, I would intentionally sell my house to a Black family just to spite you. It was covered in the newspaper and referred to as spite selling. So if you come from a place where the idea of living next to a Black family is so horrible that you would intentionally do it to get back at a neighbor you dislike, imagine you're having a heart attack and you call for help. And you're sitting there and you're desperate and you're scared and you hear the sound of help walking down the hallway and help rounds the corner and you see that it's arrived in the form of two young Black men from a neighborhood that you're probably scared of. Everywhere that they went downtown, they ran into problems. They had women who said, no, you're not going to lay your hands on me. They had men that said, no, you're not going to touch me. We're going to wait and we're going to call for somebody else. And John Moon is a guy that I talked to a lot for this story. And I said to him, I said, what do you say to somebody? He said, well, let's say someone's having a heart attack. I would sit down to explain what was going on with them. I would explain what I would do for them. And then also what the delay in treatment could do. And I said, what would they do? And he said, well, they'd think about it and then they'd say yes. But the fact that you have to think about possibly death versus allowing Black hands to touch me, it says something about the psychology of the people, and it was something that they had to deal with regularly, but to their unending credit, they did it with incredible grace. The Freedom House is covered pretty regularly in the newspapers, and they were very disliked in powerful corners. Had they acted out in any kind of way, had they done anything that was, untoward in any sort of way, it would have been covered widely. There's no report at any point of, two Freedom House medics acting like human beings and just getting angry about the way they were treated. They just refused to do that, and they, call after call, regardless of what people did, they did the right thing, which is really a tremendous testament to the character of a lot of these, and a lot of them are really young guys with very little world experience. This was kind of the first time they were being exposed to the world.
As you're telling this story, it reminds me of an episode of The Jeffersons when George and Tom had gone to a kind of an EMT course to learn how to do mouth-to-mouth resuscitation.
Mhm.
And it just so happened that some of the men who were in the class were Klansmen. And when they found out they were Klansmen, there was a big clash. And then one of the Klansmen had a heart attack, and George saved them by doing mouth-to-mouth.
Yeah.
And then when the Klansman's son said, "Mr. Jefferson saved your life," he said, "That black man put his mouth on me, son, you should have let me die."
Yeah.
And so I'm picturing that there were probably some people who felt that way, who would rather have died than to have let these men from this scary neighborhood touch them or treat them. And I just wonder if they went through that. And so I'm glad to know that I think a lot of these young men probably expected that treatment. And so it maybe helped them to be able to do their jobs with honor, and because they already knew it was going to happen, it wasn't a shock to them. So that's
Well,
just
that was why I asked the question about just the
Mhm.
time period when he said 1965, because there were some things that were understood during that time period.
right.
And Black people understood they had to be submissive, regardless of how they were being treated. It was just that was the way it was. And just because it was a northern city, some of the worst race situations occurred in northern cities like Boston and Chicago. So some of them were worse than what happened in the South. So
Yeah.
now you mentioned the Jeffersons. I'm going to mention two movies that came to my mind. While he was talking, it was coming to my mind. One is Raisin in the Sun, the original Raisin in the Sun with Sidney Poitier, where they bought a home in a white neighborhood, and
Yes.
the homeowners association or whatever, the man came over to buy the house back just so they wouldn't move in. And then, this other movie has Sidney Poitier too, but it's even older, called No Way Out. I don't know if you've ever seen No Way Out. Sidney Poitier is a doctor. He's like just become a doctor. It's the late 1950s, and Richard Whitmark, I think is the actor, is a very racist person. He's also a criminal, and he comes into the hospital and he needs a doctor, and Sidney Poitier is trying to help him, and he refuses to let him touch him or his brother, and the brother dies. So during that time, that was very common. It seems like a world away now, but during those times, it was Black people were in a particular position, and that's where we were. Our ancestors were. And we
I think
really,
this is why I'm glad that he told this story,
yes,
because I've never thought of the history of Black EMTs or Black paramedics, and it never crossed my mind. And so this is a whole group of people whose stories would have never gotten told had he not made that phone call. And then some guy's like, "What? You want to tell my story?"
yeah, and then you kept at it, and you learned a lot while you were reporting and just doing the research for the book. I want to
Yeah.
tell you how I heard about the book.
All right.
I have a very good customer. We used to have a brick and mortar, but we have a customer that's been buying books from us for 20 years, even though we no longer have a brick and mortar, but we can still order books. And she listens to NPR like every day, all day, about new books that have come out. And she said, "You need to get Keith Hazzard on your show." And so that was how, then I researched the book and then I reached out to you. That was how I learned about it.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I mean, it really is an incredible story. And, you know, like I said before, these are people who did a job, you know, who answered a call for help decades ago. And I've been waiting since before I was born for just someone to say thank you. When the city took over EMS world citywide in Pittsburgh, their medical director set out these list of demands, I guess you could say, 6 things that she wanted the city to do in recognition of Freedom House. And some of it was, you know, allowing them, you know, when they transferred over to the city, to operate at the current level and not have to go through any other training, and to keep partnerships together. And if, you know, if somebody worked in a certain neighborhood, let them stay in that neighborhood because that's what they're familiar with. And so she sent this letter to the mayor. And so I have the letter she sent to the mayor. And I have the mayor's response. And he says, okay, you know, he agrees to, you know, we'll take over service at, you know, at midnight on, you know, in October. And here's all these things we're going to do. And of her 6 demands, 5 of them he lists out, you know, we're 100% we'll do this, 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 and this. And the 6th demand was that the city of Pittsburgh will publicly thank thank Freedom House for the service that it's provided for the last 8 years. And that was the only demand that they refused. The one that was free, the one that would have been easiest for them to do, was the one they refused. And so that demand is not on the mayor's response. And, you know, the city never did anything formal or official to thank Freedom House. And I think for them, you know, it was incredibly frustrating to have done this thing and then for have it to be swept under the rug. But, you know, this wonderful postscript is that, you know, John Moon, one of the original paramedics, stayed with the city of Pittsburgh his entire career, retired as a chief. And in the mid-90s, he hired a young EMT by the name of Amara Gilchrist. And she stuck with the city and rose up through the ranks. And just this past spring, she became not only the first woman, but also the first Black person to be the chief of Pittsburgh EMS. And that was someone that John not only hired, but mentored throughout her entire career. And so, you know, there's this wonderful legacy to what, you know, these guys helped bring into the world. Not only did they bring EMS to people like me, you know, who, you know, they created the job that I did. And not only did they, you know, create this field that has changed the way lives are saved around the world, but locally and on a very personal level, you know, they were the bridge to bringing in a person like Amara Gilchrist to run the department.
Wow. Well, we could talk to you longer, but unfortunately, we've come to the end of the interview. But I do want to remind people, I believe your book will be released on the 15th of this month.
Paperback comes out. Yep, the book's out now. Paperback comes out in a couple of days. You know, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, anywhere you get your books.
I want to ask one final question. We have several people. Please post the book and the author. So Rhonda, if you could do that.
I've already posted his website in the chat, but I can post it again.
Okay, but it sounds like this whole thing would make a great movie. Have you sold the movie rights?
We're working on it. We're working on it now. So
okay, it just sounds like a wonderful movie, and it's something that hasn't been told. You know, so many of the movies are the same story over and over. This is totally different.
Different story. Yeah, I've had a lot of these guys reach out to me and say, you know, I think Denzel's son would be perfect to play a young version of me. So I'm like, all right, hey, hopefully. So, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being a guest on Black Authors Matter TV, and congratulations on your book. And thank you for bringing this forgotten history to light.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate a chance to talk about it.
Thank you.
Okay, have a great evening.
Best wishes.
Happy New Year.
Same to you. Same to you.
Okay. We're going to bring on our next guest. We're going to quickly give the trivia question for Laws of Depravity. And the trivia question is, there are 2 New York police detectives that are central to this story. Name one of them, and you have to give their first and last name. So there are 2 detectives. You have to give one of their names. You need to give the first and last name, and you win this book. So our next guest, we're going to continue with history, but this time we're talking about a different part of the country, and it's Georgia, or more specifically, Atlanta. And the book is called America's Black Capital: How African Americans Remade Atlanta in the Shadow of the Confederacy. And the author is a professor as well. And his name is Jeffrey Ogbar. And hopefully I pronounced Ogbar right. Welcome to
Ogbar. It's a pleasure to be
Ogbar.
here. Yeah,
Okay, all right.
when Obama got elected, it made it a lot easier. I was like, like Obama. So Ogbar, it's
Okay,
a pleasure to be here.
Ogbar. Okay. Well, thank you so much for being a guest on Black Authors Matter TV and telling us about your new book called America's Black Capital. And do you have a copy of the book with you?
I do. Let me see right here. Let me see if it, I don't know if it will come. There we go. Well, I disappear. And so
Yeah.
it's right here, and this is, let's see.
Keep putting it close to you. I think if you put it close to
There we
you,
go.
there you go. Okay. And what is the picture that you use to depict for the cover? What
It's a, yep, it's a picture of Atlanta's life insurance company that was started by Alonzo Herndon, who was the first African-American millionaire in Atlanta. And the insurance company eventually became one of the biggest Black insurance companies in the country. And his son is Norris Herndon, who is in the center of this picture. In 1971, when Ebony Magazine was the first place to call Atlanta the Black Mecca, they talked about Norris Herndon, who was on the cover of this book as a much younger man. But at that time, according to Ebony Magazine, Norris was the wealthiest African American in the country. So, we think about entertainers. It wasn't, any athlete, wasn't anybody who sang, and not that there's anything wrong with singing or dancing. Wasn't Barry Gordy, but it was someone that many people are not familiar with. And that was Norris Herndon in 1971 in Atlanta.
Okay. And are you from Atlanta or from Georgia?
No, I'm from Los Angeles. I was born in Chicago, raised in LA, first grade through high school in LA, and I went to undergrad in Atlanta at Morehouse College, and that's my introduction to the putatively Black Mecca. And that's when I, in many ways, became sort of mesmerized and fascinated by the city.
Well, my daughter would be happy to know that she is a product of the AUC. She went to Clark Atlanta University.
Oh, nice, nice. Yep, fantastic. AUC love, great.
Yes, yes. So you went to college in Atlanta and just never left?
No, I undergrad in Atlanta and went to graduate school at Indiana University and then settled in New England and Connecticut. So my first job out of grad school was University of Connecticut, and I've been there since 1997.
Oh,
Wow.
okay. So you are in the North, but you focused your book on. Then did you live in Atlanta once you graduated from college? Did you ever live there?
No. I spent 2 summers there in grad school, just teaching at Morehouse. I mean, like little summer classes. And but no, I never lived there at all beyond grad school and undergrad. And even grad school, we're talking about 2 summers. But Atlanta, is if I were to anthropomorphize the city, I would say that Atlanta is like a friend that you meet in undergrad, like in college, and never knew this person. Y'all you may have become roommates and then best of friends, and you go your separate ways, and you might not see that person for a year, but when you see that person, you pick up like nothing happened, and you grow together over the years. And many of us have friends, like the way I look at LA, where I grew up. LA is like a friend from my childhood, and I love that friend. We were close, but we've grown apart. I see him, and we just reminisce over what we used to do back in the day. And so we're not, but Atlanta's that place that I've always kind of grown with. And as Atlanta has continued to expand, and as you probably know, it attracts, more Black people have migrated to Atlanta than any metropolitan area in the country in the last generation. And I see why, but that energy is very compelling. And I try to engage that in the book.
I live in the DC area, and I think that DC is a good competitor to Atlanta for the amount of Black people it attracts.
You're not only right, I talk about that in the book. And the book if there's any city that comes close to, you know, challenging Atlanta in so many different metrics, different areas, it's DC. And I can spout a few of them, but the DC metro area, as you know, has a lot of affluent African American communities, suburban communities. The same thing stands for Atlanta. The metro areas both are sort of massive draws to Black migration and a certain level of affluence also. And you have these, what I think makes these two places distinct is that they have these massive centers for Black education, Howard University and the Atlanta University Center. And so Howard is a much larger school than any AU Center school. I mean, so Morehouse, we're rivals with Howard, but you know, Morehouse, we have like 2,300 students. Howard has 11,000. I mean, there are multiples. If you took Spelman and Morehouse combined, Howard is still over twice our size. And so you take the entire University Center, AU Center, then you kind of approximate, but we're still not as large as Howard. So you see why you have such a prominent position of Black talent, sort of a community that has generated Black talent for generations. A lot of people stay in the community, taking advantage of the institutions, and they become critical incubators for leadership as well.
That's true. Now I'm going to give you all a stat since y'all are talking about numbers and migrations. Texas has more Black people than any other state. And you all can look that up. I was surprised when I found out. I was thinking it was second or third, but it's first. It's number one.
Don't
And
mess with Texas.
yeah.
That's what they say.
But see,
So,
but
yeah.
it's the entire state. Is there any specific city that has a high concentration of Black people? I can venture to guess which city it is.
Well, Houston has a ton. You know, Harris County, which is comprised of Houston, has 5 million people, not 5 million Black people, but just the county of Harris County, which includes Houston, has 5 million people. And so Dallas it has a lot as well. And then we have the military, we have several military bases that have a lot of Black people. But I was surprised. Now, I can't tell you the number. It's more than 1 million, I'm pretty sure. But I know the state with the most Black people is Texas. And I forgot who was second because when I found out Texas was first, I didn't even really look that far into
Don't really look at second and third, right?
And I'm not a native, but I've been here a long time. So
Yeah.
anyway, we're everywhere, and where we are, we tend to concentrate because we like community. So, you know, the places where Black people are, there's swaths of America where there are no Black people, but there's parts where there's lots. So
Yeah, and I think
that's for once, you know.
yeah, and I think that's been a critical draw for Atlanta, right? Like we have here in I live in Hartford, Connecticut, and Hartford is 80% Black and Latino, and a lot of people think New England, Connecticut, and they think of it as disproportionately white. The city is like I say, 80% Black and Latino. The state itself is one of the most representative states of America. It is, I think, second to Illinois, and maybe right above New Jersey in its representation of whites, Blacks, Asians, and Latinos in a way that reflects the country. You know, so you take somewhere like Texas, or Texas and California, where Latinos are overrepresented, or Asians are overrepresented in Hawaii in relation to their population, or Vermont is overrepresented with whites. Connecticut is really representative of the country, but we struggle to bring Black teachers to the city of Hartford. And part of that, according to people who say they're recruiting, I don't know how true this is, but they talk about just how difficult it is to bring Black teachers up to Hartford, or have them stay here. Atlanta, on the other hand, is 51% Black now. About 75% of the teachers are Black. You know, it's like, again, extreme high numbers in relation to the population. So there's a community and a sort of draw that I think people seek when they decide where they want to go to establish their professional careers. And to quote Julian Bond, who was a civil rights leader, one of the leaders of Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and who was an state representative for Atlanta, Georgia, he said this back in the 1970s, but he told me again this in the 2000s, that before he passed, that if you are a Black professionally trained person who wants to explore his or her career, that there's no city better to maximize your talents and to fly as unfettered as possible than Atlanta. But he said, if you're poor and Black, Atlanta will look like Memphis or Gary, Indiana, you know? So that while you do have a whole bunch of Black folks who are doing extraordinarily well in the city, there are also, of course, Black folks who are not. And those who are not, I talk about this throughout the book. I mean, even 30, 40, or 100 years ago, you had Black people doing extraordinarily well in different spaces, but you also had Black people in pressing poverty. And that theme has always been around, these sort of class tensions and class divides. But people are drawn to the city, I think, oftentimes to see and participate in what we might measure as Black excellence.
Well, you have that educational complex where that's a sort of a farming, breeding ground, for lack of a better term, for professional positions once they graduate.
Yeah.
So you have all those people coming there to be educated, and not all of them are from Georgia. No, it attracts people from all over, and then many of them stay there once they graduate.
And it's been that way for generations. So in my book, I talk about how a lot of people that we see as iconic African-American figures, you know, like James Weldon Johnson, who wrote the novel Autobiography of an Ex-Colored Man, who also co-wrote the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. James Weldon Johnson, who was a diplomat, who was a civil rights activist, a novelist, NAACP leader, you know, he got his education at Atlanta University, which became, merged with Clark College, became Clark Atlanta University. Walter White, who was the executive secretary to the NAACP, is a grad as well of Atlanta University. Du Bois, the most formidable, celebrated African-American intellectual ever, and one of the intellectual giants, period, in the United States in the 20th century, was a professor at Atlanta University. It was there where he wrote his seminal book, Souls on Black Folk. It was there when he sort of cut his teeth in seeing the most, vicious, uncivilized expressions of white supremacy, but also that, like, it fired his desire to be more militant when he saw that sort of ugliness and the savagery of it all. And then you, of course, Dr. King, but I could go to this whole list of people who lived in Atlanta, were drawn to the city. And I mean, Maynard Jackson, whose dad, Maynard Jackson Sr., came from Texas. He went from Texas, went to Atlanta for college, and ultimately came back and became a minister, passed away, but he had a son with him, and his son stayed in Atlanta, and of course became the first Black mayor of a major Southern city. And so the city has drawn so many people to those universities and those colleges. They have been the nucleus for so much over the generations.
As you say all of that, which is all totally true, so many of our leaders were educated in Atlanta or in the South. But then you also mentioned how Atlanta is an overlooked center of the new Negro Renaissance, or also known as the Harlem Renaissance. So how is it overlooked when there's been so many people who were educated there, who moved there to get a better life? How did it become overlooked?
It's an excellent question. So a lot of times, so historians have used this term, and I think most of us who are familiar with African-American history we know of the Harlem Renaissance. Mm-hmm. And anyone who knows anything about the Harlem Renaissance will think about Harlem, New York City in the 1920s, and think of Zora Neale Hurston. We'll think of Langston Hughes. We'll think about the jazz artists. We'll think about all these expressions of African-American intellectual, political work. And we might even think of Marcus Garvey and other folks, perhaps Du Bois even, who was active in the Harlem Renaissance. The thing is that at that moment, they did not call it the Harlem Renaissance. And Langston Hughes didn't refer to it as the Renaissance for decades, the Harlem Renaissance. And Alain Locke, who's a so-called dean of the Harlem Renaissance, who was a philosophy professor, Harvard-educated philosophy professor at Howard University, he used the term the New Negro Renaissance. And at that time, what was going on in Harlem was also going on in Chicago and Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. and other cities. And it was in the late 60s and early 70s that people started calling it the Harlem Renaissance instead of the New Negro. We were moving away from the word Negro, and then people didn't know what to come up, but they were like, all right, call it Harlem, because everyone knew Harlem as this conspicuously Black city or part of a city. So that term stuck, but what it did was mute all these other cities and all the contributions they made to the same moment. And a lot of times people have talked about Chicago as a major locus for this activity, but Harlem and Chicago cannot really, in many ways, compare to what was going on in Atlanta at that time. So in the 1920s and 1930s, there were Black newspapers all across the United States. And although there were cities with more Black people numerically, only one city in the United States of America had more Black people percentage-wise than Atlanta, Georgia in 1920 or 1930. That's how super Black Atlanta was as a percentage of the city, right? So it was even super Black back then. So at that time, all these Black newspapers existed across the United States, but there was one daily Black newspaper, and it was in Atlanta. It wasn't the Chicago Defender, wasn't New Amsterdam News, wasn't Pittsburgh Courier, but it was the Atlanta Daily News. And also we have in Atlanta at that time, this is the interesting thing for you, Dr. Lawson, is that in the early 1920s, African Americans in Atlanta were barred from public parks, from schools. In fact, in the beginning in 1921, there was no public high school that allowed Black students anywhere in the state of Georgia, including Atlanta, obviously, right? So African Americans who wanted their children to get a high school education had to pay money to go to a private school, and the Atlanta University Center schools offered secondary education. So we think of like Spelman and these places, but they actually had high schools, so girls could graduate high school. But check this out, in the early 1920s, not only did they ban Black people from going to public parks, hotels, restaurants, they had amusement parks throughout the city of Atlanta that refused to allow Black people in at any point. Some cities like Memphis would say, or Chicago, say, we won't allow Black people in except for one day a week, or except for Negro Day, some special day in the year, right?
Yeah.
Atlanta,
Thing.
They
yeah,
had
right?
that at beaches and amusement parks and even state fairs, and
It was crazy.
it
So
was.
Atlanta created the first, and this is the thing about DC, Atlanta created a place called Joyland Park. And Joyland Park opened in the early 1920s in Atlanta. It became the very first Black amusement park of its size and scope in the country. 2 weeks later, DC came around and offered, they were already in the works, obviously, right? But 2 weeks later, that same month, in the month of May, DC opened its own Black-owned amusement park. And so DC and Atlanta, again, were neck and neck with all these sort of Black achievements. But yeah, in that time, in addition to not just having, this daily Black newspaper or having this Black amusement park, African Americans had a little suburb they created. They actually had, in addition to all of this, we have the Apollo Theater in New York City, and we have Club Alabama in South Central Los Angeles. But they had two nightclubs in Atlanta that were Black owned, that were places where all the Black amusement, the sort of entertainment figures of the day came. And so, Duke Ellington, a series of everyone that you could think of came through these two clubs in Atlanta at this time. So Atlanta was a point where you have intellectual work, you have activists, you have the Universal Negro Improvement Association. Marcus Garvey comes down there. Infamously, he meets with the Ku Klux Klan in Atlanta, right, which actually destroys his reputation in the African American community. People saw him as a lapdog for the Klan and that kind of thing. So all these things happened in Atlanta in the 1920s in a way that far outstripped Black businesses in other cities as well. So yeah, Atlanta was a central part of the new Negro Renaissance in the 1920s.
And it's still now, it's starting to be known for movie making now.
One of the
Tyler
largest.
Perry has really, I'm sure there are other people, but Tyler Perry in particular has really transformed that. He's really opened the doors for a lot of people.
The largest Black-owned film and production center that Black people ever created anywhere is there in Atlanta right now, owned by a Black billionaire, right? And the place where he owns it is a Fort McPherson, which was a tied to the Civil War. It was the highest ranked general in the Union side to die in battle, was in the Battle of Atlanta. And the fort was named for him. It was a Union fort, but it became the site for this massive film and production place now that's Black owned.
Absolutely.
Oh, I
They
wanted to
done
give an
crime scene last
update.
couple of years.
It has. I wanted to give an update on the state population rankings. The viewers have given their input.
Everybody wants
Let's
to
hear
claim the biggest state now. We have the most black people. We have the most black people. We have the
it.
most black people.
Texas is first, and then Georgia, Florida, New York, and California in that order.
Well,
Okay.
that's all fine and good, y'all, but I'm just gonna put it out there. And I'm from New Orleans. I don't even know why I'm claiming all of this, but the area that has the highest per capita of high income black people
It is. It's a big
and
group.
is in PG County, Prince
Mhm.
George's County, Maryland, and now Howard County and Charles County. I mean, not Howard County, but Charles County. That's where your highest per capita of high income black people are. So you'll have black people living in $1 million neighborhoods.
Yeah, that's a stat that I know is true, and it's been that way for a while. It's been that way
Yeah,
for a while. And
yeah,
the federal government's presence has some bearing on it, but you also have a lot of educational institutions in the DC area. I went to one, Georgetown, but you have Howard and George Washington, you have American University, you have University of Maryland.
yeah.
So you have a lot of Morgan State. So you have a lot of educational institutions similar to Atlanta in that there's a constant flow of graduates that can then take these professional positions.
Yeah, of all metro areas in the United States, DC has the highest percentage of African Americans with college degrees of any metro in the United States, and then Atlanta is number 2. And the richest majority black county is now Charles County, as you said, Dr. Lawson, and it passed up Prince George's County. I think it was last
They're
year.
all moving to Waldorf. Yeah, I live in the sticks too, so I understand.
Yeah,
So in Charles County, what are the cities, the suburban?
Waldorf, basically Waldorf.
Okay, Waldorf. Okay.
Yeah, and I live in Accokeek, which is right outside of Waldorf. So I live in Prince George's County, but I'm right down the street from Charles County.
Yeah.
But
Well,
you were telling your story. I'm telling the story about Atlanta and the different areas. It made me think. I mentioned a little while ago. I'm from New Orleans, and there was Pontchartrain Beach, which was a segregated park in New Orleans, and so black people had to go to Lincoln Beach, and Lincoln Beach was basically the black beach in New Orleans. Yeah, we actually have beaches in New Orleans, believe it or not. And just in the last few years, there's been a big movement to reopen Lincoln Beach and reclaim some of that history, because once it closed down, and once desegregation happened, and black people were like, "Oh, we can go to the white areas now." They just left Lincoln Beach sitting there. And a lot of the black stores in the black neighborhoods, they just kind of sat there, and everybody wanted to go to the white areas because now they were allowed to go. So fortunately, there's a huge movement in New Orleans to reclaim that history and to bring some of those areas back to their old splendor. So I'm really happy to hear that. And I think a lot of that is happening in Atlanta, even though I know that there's been a big movement toward kind of fighting against a lot of the gentrification in Atlanta, because they feel like a lot of that history is being taken away. There's still that faction that's trying to preserve the history in the city, which I think is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, so there was there's an area that, according to some people, and this is a longer story, but Fortune magazine allegedly said in 1954 that Auburn Avenue was the richest Negro street in the world. And whether it said it or not, a whole bunch of people have repeated that statement. And in 1954, and then back in the 1920s, Auburn Avenue had emerged as this concentration of all sorts of Black business activity. And over the years, as African Americans got access to the entire city, the Black center of of economic opportunity and commerce dispersed, and it's been all over the city now. And so Atlanta right now has the highest percentage of Black-owned businesses, the metro area per capita, of any metro in the country. And that's a good thing that people are all, I mean, that people, I don't think anyone ever thought that Black people should not have access to the entire city, right? I don't think anyone ever said, we should never have access to the, and so if you, and one thing about Atlanta is that if you go to Buckhead, which is the most exclusive part of the city, and go to any restaurant on a Friday or Saturday night, you will always see a whole bunch of Black folks in a way that I don't see in any other city where I go. And there are areas, and I talk about gentrification because there's a lot that people say, but I look at numbers and data, and a lot of this will dispute what we think we see, right? Because I know we all know this term confirmation bias, and maybe many of the listeners also know about it. And confirmation bias is this idea that if you believe something, then every time you might see 15 examples of that being disproven, but the one time it's proven, that's your reason to believe what you believe, right? You're like, I told you so, right? And the other 14 are just dismissed because they're anomalies, although they were the majority, right? So when we think about Black people being, there's a narrative that we often have. I call it the declension thesis, this idea that Black communities have been in a state of decline since the civil rights movement. But, you know, I look at the numbers. I'm saying, okay, are Black businesses smaller than before, fewer than before? Do Black people live shorter lives? Do we have higher infant mortality rates? Do we achieve less in terms of graduation? So I look at all these important data points. And now look at Atlanta, right? So I have friends, smart people probably way smarter than I am. And they were saying that that Black people have been pushed out of Atlanta. The percentage of Black folks in Atlanta peaked in 1990 at 67%. Now, the percentage of Black people in Atlanta is about 50%, 51%. So a lot of people are like, Black people got pushed out, Black people can't live in Atlanta, Black people can't afford Atlanta, all this stuff. Let's look at the data. I have a whole chapter where I look at the data and how Atlanta has changed in the 21st century. So between 2010 and 2020, more Black people moved into the city of Atlanta, and the city of Atlanta in 2020 would have had more Black people on record than any point in its history had not two sections of the city seceded from the city, including this place called South Fulton, which has 100,000 people now. South Fulton is the blackest city in the United States of America, over 100,000 people per the 2020 census. And that was a segment, it's like 90% Black. That's a segment that pulled away from Atlanta. And so Atlanta actually has more people in 2020 than any people in the history of the city of Atlanta. The thing is that while the percentage dropped, you had an influx of whites and Latinos and Asians simultaneously. So more people were coming into the city, period. More non-Black people were coming to the city, period. So this idea that Black people are being pushed out is not met with any data, right? The city's gotten more diverse and more people. Also, if you look at the incomes of people who live outside the city, they actually are wealthier than the people who live inside the city. So if you were poor, you would not be moving out of the city, since the city is actually cheaper to live in and the income levels are lower than people who live outside the city. And so it's really kind of interesting. I can't say this is the case with every city, but I do look at these sorts of numbers. And for some reason, I think, you know, I like to think that this is what I tell people. Like Fannie Lou Hamer and John Lewis and Ella Baker and Angela Davis and King and Huey and everyone else, Malcolm, I like to think that their lives were not in vain. I like to think that after all the stuff they did, that Black people actually have made strides to continue to make strides, and not this idea that Black people have just only gone backwards. And historians will tell you that in the civil rights movement, if you look at the white supremacist governors and mayors and congressmen who fought against civil rights, one of the things they said very explicitly was that if we did not segregate Black folks, they would in fact not be able to compete with whites, and they would decline. Their quality of life would decline. And so in many ways, this idea that we are sort of always in a process of declining goes with an agreement of our most vicious adversaries who pushed against all the things that the people we love advocated for, right? And so I can't again speak for Cincinnati and Detroit and, you know, Chicago, a lot of these other places. When I look at Atlanta, there's no way to think that we aren't better off than we were, although the city has a whole bunch of problems. And I talk about those too. Like there are pronounced problems with social mobility in Atlanta. I mean, one of the metrics about Atlanta is that of all the cities in the United States, has a lowest level of social mobility. Is number one with social immobility. A child born in a poor community in Atlanta, she has a 4% chance of escaping poverty into the middle class. And that's the worst of any city in the country. But then if you expand it to the metro area, all of a sudden Atlanta drops from number one worst to the 227th worst. So it plummets. So it speaks a lot to what the metro area has sort of done in terms of Black achievement, Black success, and Black innovation.
Wow, I
We
could talk
would
to you.
love to continue to talk about
Yeah.
Atlanta, but we actually passed our time. So we want to let you show the book cover one last time and tell people that they can go and get the book America's Black Capital. And he's coming in and out, but we can see him, America's Black
Oh, America's
Capital.
Black Cattle. I know.
It's
This is
about
terrible.
It's about
There we go.
Atlanta, how African Americans remade Atlanta in the shadow of the Confederacy. So we've had a very, very vigorous and interesting conversations. It's all about us in the United States and
Yes, I enjoyed it.
how we're growing and thriving. So it's great, and Atlanta is known as the Mecca, especially in the South for Black people. So thank you for being a guest on Black Authors Matter TV. And we want people to go out and get your book. And congratulations on releasing it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you both. It was fantastic. Thank you very much, and wish you the best.
And thank
Okay.
you. You have a
Happy
great
New
one.
Year.
I wish you the best as well.
Happy New Year to you.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Well, we've gotten a lot of history tonight, and we on both ends, we've had bookstore owners. So we started with the bookstore owner, and we had the history in the middle, and we ending with the bookstore owner. And we're welcoming to the show Amber Collins, and she's the owner of the Soul Book Nook in Waterloo, Iowa.
Ooh.
So that's not necessarily a place where we would think about a Black bookstore, but Amber is the owner of one, and she's going to be on screen shortly as soon as
Yeah,
we
what
get.
is that box? How she do that?
I don't know.
That's cool looking though.
I guess it's her
It's-
backdrop or whatever you call it. So Amber, if you can lower your camera a little bit, just
I sure will.
see your.
Can you see better?
No,
There you
there. That right there.
Yeah.
Right there.
Okay.
Oh,
I got
oh,
was
now
Cute
we're seeing your chest.
Where's that? Where's that? Is it in the
sweater?
I flew back a little.
Okay, no, that's great. Welcome, Amber, to Black Authors Matter TV.
Well, thank you. I am honored to be a guest on your show, and a happy new year to you and the audience. And I'm honored.
Yeah, happy New Year to you.
Yeah,
Yes,
welcome.
thank you.
So tell us about, first of all, how did you end up in Waterloo, Iowa? Is that where
Well,
you're
actually,
from?
yes, actually, my people did migrate from Mississippi to Iowa, during the time. And I grew up with my grandparents and my mother too, but she traveled a lot as a journalist.
Okay,
So
now
that's how I came to be here.
was your family like trying to go somewhere else and they got tired of traveling, so they just said, "Let me just stay here," and they happen to be Waterloo, Iowa.
No, you know what it is? You know how relatives follow relatives, the kinship, because I was reading about when they came from Africa, that kinship network was all they had as they were snatched from each other. So as their relatives went before them, I believe this became a destination spot for them and then the rest of the cousins and aunts, and they would live with each other once they got here until they were all up on their feet. So that's how they came to be here.
It makes sense. It makes
Yeah.
sense.
Back in the way back, that they'll say, they were migrating somewhere, and the wagon wheel broke, And
And
where they ended up, that's where, when the wagon wheel broke, that's where they ended up. But
you know, they never told us, and that's why authors are so important.
I
Or
agree.
oral stories.
I agree. Now, your mother was a journal, or your grandmother, who was a journalist? Your mother, you said, was.
My mother was a journalist. She was a child of the 70s, and she was one of those activists and journalists, activist writers. And she also performed the spoken word. And so she was in the 70s. Once she turned 18 and graduated with honors, she never looked back and never came back to live in Iowa. She actually lives in California.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, so books were I'm thinking, most likely part of your upbringing as far as being involved with books. And because if somebody's a journalist, especially during that time, then books are a part of their lives.
Miss Lynn, that is correct. My mother sought escape and education through books as she was growing up with a girl living here in Iowa in the Midwest as an African American who faced a lot of racism, microaggressions, you know, that atmosphere of the Midwest during that time in the 70s. So she escaped through books. And once she graduated and went to college, my mother began to like, she's an avid reader and she's also an author herself, a poet author. And so she would travel and send me books to read. And so she inspired that love of book reading to me as I then began to follow her same path. My grandmother was educated. I don't know what grade she made it to, but she read perfectly in Sunday school. I don't know where she received her education because I'm not sure what grade she finished in the South in Mississippi, but she could read fluently and was one of the best readers in church. And the Bible was what I inherited more so the reading the Bible from her. So that's how I came to love reading and be surrounded by books.
Yeah, a lot of Black people during, the early part of the century, I'll say, or, 20s and 30s and 40s, the Bible was the only real book that a lot of Black homes had.
Yes.
And a lot of people could either read or recite from the Bible.
That is so true. That is actually a historical fact. That is where they learned how to read. You know, whether sneaking into the slave master's shelf and getting that Bible down and reading it or exploring it. But and that's why I still honor and reverence the Bible so much. It taught them to read, which it has power in the written word. And so I believe that helped to open up their awareness to even begin to learn how to read. You know what I'm saying? That Bible, the power in that word. So yeah.
And a lot of family history is in those Bibles. Those family Bibles kept the family tree. And a lot of people, when they're studying their genealogy, they get information from a family Bible that's been in the family for generations.
I
Yes.
remember Bibles way back in the day, and they had the tree, and then you wrote everybody's names.
Yes.
I used to love that Bible because that's where I learned everybody's names, and now it's like nobody has them anymore.
Yeah, they were big too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Were large
I have
Bibles.
some of those. I have some of those. I when I get them in my store, do you know I do not sell them because I miss that. I miss people using what's your name? I'm sorry. The other uh person on the
I'm Gwen, and this is Dr. Rhonda Larson.
Dr. Larson, thank you. That's correct. That Bible used to teach us, show us our family tree. And I believe that many families have lost the importance of getting that Bible, inheriting that Bible, and then passing it down to the next generation and keeping track of that family tree. My mother, she has been doing research on where the origins of my grandfather, her father, and the origins of her mother. And so the trail gets lost with my father somewhere because he was loaned out to different plantations to work the land until my grandmother and him left Mississippi. So we don't know anything else beyond that.
We were talking with the last guest about, we were talking about history, and we were talking about just basically how, there are so many well-to-do Black people now. And I think that as the generations went along, and we wanted the next generation to have better than we did. And then the generation after that should have better than that generation. But I think as we do that, and we've raised our kids to, go for the best and to go for that high paying job and be the best at this and have high class and have more than I had. I think along that way, we've forgotten about a lot of the traditions that
Yes. I agree.
really made us who we are. So while
Yes.
I take part responsibility in that too, because I pushed my daughter to read. I pushed her to go to college, and I tried to tell her about her history. But I think that there are times where I'm just telling her about her history, but I don't know if I made those traditions that I grew up with. I don't know if I made them as important to her as they were to me. And I think often that happens as we go through the generations, we forget that we have to, while we want our kids to do the best and we want them to be modernized and
Yes.
innovative,
Yes.
we've got to make sure that they remember the traditions and the culture that goes along with what makes them who they are.
Dr. Larson, you have hit it on the nail. We are responsible for instilling the next generation. That's why Black authors are so important. Black authors help shape the narrative of the next generation. And the Black authors in the past, beginning in 1920, began to shape the narrative of our people, the movements, the abolitionists, the activists. They all help shape the narrative of our people going forward. Like they inspired the civil rights movements, the Reconstructionist period. You look at the Harlem Renaissance. And so we are responsible for shaping the narrative. Traditions are very important to be passed down. And now, not just oral.
Right.
We need to write it down. We need to write it in a book and leave it to our children.
Absolutely.
Now that we can read and write.
Right. And what we say on this show is the thing about being an author and about writing books is that your words can outlive you. So, we're still reading works from people who have gone on. And when we transition, our works will still be here for people to enjoy and learn from.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So maybe that's it. Maybe now this generation feels that social media technology will be their pass on, instead of a book or instead of a oral account to their children, they're so into recording, like what we're doing, on this platform. Like Dr. Larson said, maybe we can make sure they also take what they're doing on the platform and also write it. You know what I'm saying?
Yes,
if you do the show, write it.
They go together. But the thing about social media is it's fleeting. All those imagery that you see, it's just one after another. It's no retention. It's just
That's right. You're right.
after another. And and that algorithm thingy they got going, it is real, because if you click one video, then you'll start getting the same type of videos, whether or not you want to see them or not.
That's why I'm never sure I want to click on something. I'm like, I don't want to.
I'm scared to click. Because if I click it, then it's gonna be a whole bunch of them.
That's right.
And then I have to wait until like a reset. That's why I always click a cat video. If I click a cat video, then I'm gonna see cats again.
That's right. Right.
But that algorithm, whoever wrote the program for those algorithms.
I don't like the algorithm. It's hard.
I don't either, because I don't want to see the same thing over and over and over. I want to see something new or fresh. But it's very fleeting. It's not. There's no retention there. And words, the visual of reading words, you get much more retention.
You really do. You really do.
So tell us about your bookstore. This old book now.
Hey, what types of books do you have? I know you have the Bible, because you mentioned that. So what else do you sell in the Soul Book? I love the name, by the way, Soul Book.
Thank you. Soul Book. I was called to it during the time of the pandemic. I was called to the Spirit gave me the name because I was concerned about the souls of men. And I didn't know my part in it. John Lewis wrote about knowing your part in the movement, not just coming and thinking because you got a title in your career profession, standing in the front line. No, you may belong in the back of the line or in the kitchen in the movement. So what it was, I found Soul Book Nook was what the Spirit gave me, and this store was to have every book for everybody. You know what I'm saying? Excluding some, like I don't do hood books or, you know, anti-God books. I don't do anything, sell any books like that, but I sell science fiction. I sell religious, philosophy, psychology, uh, anything you can think of. I sell fiction, nonfiction, sports. So this bookstore has every genre that any other bookstore, large corporate bookstore would have. And because I wanted this to be a place of welcoming everyone's welcome.
How
And
long have
so
you been
there,
open?
I opened in the midst of the pandemic. In September 2020 is when I opened my physical site. I started out in my truck because 2019, when COVID hit, it ended my I couldn't work with children anymore. I couldn't
Mm.
substitute. So I started at the end of 2020. I didn't have any, capital. So what I did was I bought like 4 books at a time, 4 to 10 books at a time, and I just drove around and started selling them to family members. And then I registered a name for the store, and then I just kept calling and looking for a physical site until an owner of a building was willing to work with me, and that's how Soul Book Nook was birthed. And it was the first African American woman-owned bookstore to be located in Iowa, since that's verified all the way back to the 1900s when they began to first register businesses for the state of Iowa. They looked, they saw no other bookstore registered for a Black-owned bookstore. And so that's how Soul Book Nook came to be. And my daughters and I, we went for it. And we cleaned the place, built the place, and Soul Book Nook was birthed. It was manifested. So that's how we came to be.
Congratulations.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
congratulations.
Thank you.
A lot of enterprises and books came out of the pandemic. We have had so many people
Yes.
on the show that were inspired to do something because of the pandemic. And I
Yes.
think it's because the pandemic, everything came to a stop.
Yes.
And
It
it gave people a chance to reflect, and
Yes.
think and, have, visualize something for the future out of either necessity or just the opportunity to reset.
I agree with that. Yes, God put the world on the timeout.
Yeah,
And so that's what he did, because before then we were moving too much,
yeah,
not spending enough time with family. Family time and dinner time was gone. Game day was gone. We were just working and moving.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, we had to go on a little timeout.
And I think as you know, as terrible as it was that so many people passed, I remember taking a walk during COVID, and I was actually seeing families outside, just sitting with each other, fishing with
Yeah.
each other. I'm from New Orleans, and I would walk down the sidewalk right by the bayou and see people boating together. And I'm like,
Wow.
this is, at first I was mad, like, why is there so many people outside? But then I looked closer and saw what they were doing.
Beautiful.
Like, people are actually spending time together,
Yeah. Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
getting outside. I mean, it was a
Yeah.
beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
I remember that.
so what would you consider to be your ideal, your best customer, your
Ideal
give a profile of your typical customer that comes into the Soul Book Nook?
My typical customer, my best customer, is that customer that's willing to grow with me. As a new bookstore, as a never before done bookstore or seen bookstore in this community. It's one that my ideal customer is one that not necessarily agrees with every book on the shelf or agrees or understands our culture, but is willing to learn about me and I learn about them. That's my ideal customer. And so I have had forgiving customers. I've had customers that have my ideal customer is one that shares information, shares books titles they know about that I don't know about, can come in and sit down and have a cup of coffee with me in the store, lingers a little bit and we can just talk about different subjects. My ideal customer is just that. It's just someone who can come in and just remember the mom and pop stores where you could just go hang out or they would sit in chairs outside of the store and they
Yes.
talk. Okay,
Mhm.
that's my ideal customer, one that can remember why the store was open or what I want to say, feel the spirit of the store and realize that this is just about us being well and learning how to get along in our community and respect and care for one another. That's my ideal customer, and I have those customers near and far that have grown with me and stuck with me, you know, and we've learned a lot about each other. I This is the first time I've had a what I say a sister from another mother. She's sticking closer than the brother, you know. So this is the first time I've had this person stick with me so long. She came in one day and said, and I asked her what, you know, she was just saying, I want to be your friend. And I thought she had some motives or intentions and found out this woman just really wanted to be my friend from another culture. And she's been there ever since and been the greatest friend that she's crossed from business into my family. So that's my ideal customer, one where we can let all of our prejudices go, you know, our suspicions and insecurities with each other go.
It's
And
beautiful.
that's my ideal customer. It's about the soul. I really mean that. And so that's my ideal customer.
That's beautiful. So now how can, I know we're running out of time, but how can authors get their books into your store?
Just email me or call me. That's all you have to do. And share with me the title. If you can send maybe you can send a PDF format if you don't want to send a physical copy, if it's not in the budget or your author is able to do that. And then what we do is we just talk together about this, you know, the consignment, and that's it. They can just talk. We talk about book signings. That's it. Just introduce yourself and talk about your book.
Speaking of book signings, being in Iowa, a lot of times, at least with a lot of African American authors, they don't think about going to places like Iowa to do book signings.
Yes,
Do you get an opportunity to host a lot of authors at your store?
I do. I host authors. I had like two or three this past 2 months. I host authors whenever they want to call and whenever they have the time. When authors write a book, I'm aware that they should perform a certain amount of book signings when that book is placed on the shelf. And so I offer them virtual or in person, and we just arrange that. Yes,
Okay.
yeah. And even though Soul Book Nook is located in Iowa, I do have um, others that I have a store that opened up down the street from me, and one that also took the name in another part of town that's close to mine. But I reach even to Europe. I've had customers from Europe call. I've had people from New Jersey fly in, like the authors fly in from New Jersey to do a book sign, perform a book signing. So yeah, it's a far reach. Soul Book does have a far reach. Um, yeah, so that's it. Book signings are very simple in my store.
That's
Now it
awesome.
sounds like from your name, Soul Book Nook, it reminds me of a place where people could go and sit and like a book nook, like have coffee or cocoa or what a
Sure.
tea or latte or
That's
whatever.
a nice picture.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's what the visual that comes to mind. So do
Yes.
you have that? Do you have like a coffee bar in your store? Do you have anything like that? Do you have any
I
plans for
do.
that?
I do. I do. I shut it down for a while so that I could work on the floor, you know, getting back organized and regrouped on the floor. But I do. I serve tea. I serve different kind of waters, different kind of like mocktails, lavender water. I just sell different variety of drinks. We sometimes have a baker that will bake uh, you know, baked goods. And even one of the women that is a author who has been holding book signings in my store, she is actually she serves her treats. She's a baker. And so we offer a variety of treats when you come into the store. So you just have to, you can even arrange a time. You can arrange a book signing, an open house, a birthday party. You can, a meeting, book clubs. I host book clubs there. So yeah, I have a big enough space that that, you know, you can enjoy yourself there and feel relaxed and comfortable. I play jazz music. So yeah, it's a nice environment.
Okay. Well, Amber, tell people where you're located in Waterloo, you know, what part of the city. And so if they come to visit, they'll know, or if they're in the area already, they'll know how to find you.
Okay, once again, my name is Amber Collins. I'm the founder of Soul Book Nook. You can find us online at soulbooknook.com, Facebook Soul Book Nook. We're located on Main Street, 110 Main Street. So it's 110 East 4th Street, but we call it Main Street in Waterloo, Iowa. The number is on my Google. You can Google Soul Book Nook. You'll find a phone number if you need directions or help finding the store. And we're located in Waterloo, Iowa. Once again, it's Waterloo, Iowa. But I'll give you a bigger city, Des Moines. Just keep driving to Des Moines or flying in from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and you'll hit Waterloo.
Well, we did put your website to your bookstore in the chat. So hopefully we'll stay in touch. Are you on social media as well?
Yes, yes. My daughter actually operates the Facebook. You can find us there and on Instagram. And
Okay.
also, if you become a customer, there is also Libid, which has a wider range of book selections. And if you need a book you don't see, you just call us and we can order it. You pre-order it, and we can get it to you.
Awesome sauce.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you, Amber. Happy New Year and continued success with the Soul Book Nook.
Happy New Year to you, Ms. Gwen. And thank you, Dr. Lawson. It's been so enjoyable to be on your show, and Happy New Year.
And Happy New Year to you. God bless you.
Goodbye. God bless you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, well, that was the first show for this year. I do want to say Laws of Depravity was won by Stephanie Burnham, I believe. Did you see her answer?
It's a little bit of a battle going on. I was trying to figure out who was first.
I think it was Stephanie Burnham. But anyway, we'll figure it out. If we have to do it after the fact, that's fine, because we're at 9 o'clock. And that means it's time for the end of the show. We'll see you next Tuesday on Black Authors Matter TV. I'm Gwen Richardson signing off.
And I'm Dr. Rhonda Lawson. Have a wonderful evening and a great week.
Thank you for tuning in and join us next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern for another edition of Black Authors Matter TV.